Your baby's mind is growing even before they arrive. The more you talk and sing and play, the more their mind will thrive. You gotta talk with your baby, play with your baby, read to your baby, make out you're a lion. Talk with your baby, play with your baby, read to your baby. Your words will grow their mind.
Hello and welcome to the Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. It's a podcast which is dedicated to advice for parents on early childhood development and how you can help.
I'm Amelia. I'm a mum of two, Grace who's 5, Ted who's 1. I'm the kind of mum, though, who watches Bluey long after my kids have stopped.
And I probably should have said, I'm Kate. Early childhood policy has been my passion for the last 20 years. I have 2 kids too, but I'm not, unlike you, Amelia, I'm not in the trenches anymore. Both of my kids are at school.
I need 10 coffees.
But I'm really excited about sharing the kind of information that I think will be really helpful to all parents.
All right, Kate, who have we got today?
Well, today we have a international global superstar. We have Dr. Dan Worry. He's talking about the magic of early interactions. We know how we interact with our babies. Talking, playing, reading and singing will help shape their brains more than just genetics alone. And Dan has made his lifetime efforts spreading the word, showing how we can do that and showing what those interactions are teaching the child and what we can learn from it. So I'm really excited to have our first international guest.
Oh.
Dr. Dan Worry.
Dan also has a PhD in early childhood education. He is one of the world's most trusted parenting and child development authorities, advising American governments and policymakers. He's the founder and president of Early Childhood Policy Solutions. It's a public policy consultancy and it's focused on kids and families. In the last few years, Dan's harnessed the power of social media. It's incredible. He brings 30 years of expertise to hundreds of thousands of parents quite easily. Through his posts, we get to watch the cutest videos of babies and toddlers. Who doesn't want to do that? But he explains how interacting with the world around them helps brain development, and he gives us the science behind exactly what's going on there. It's uplifting, it's educational, and it's so easy to watch. He's just published a book about childcare called The Daycare Myth, and is now writing another book all about the magic of child development from conception to age 3.
I'm really excited about this one. Shall we bring him in? Dan, we are so delighted to have you with us today, and I wanted to dig into the social media content. Over 250,000 followers. There is something really special about what you put out there. And for me, I think it's about the tone. Like you have this beautiful, gentle tone that captures the joy of the relationship between parent and child, that captures the interactions, but also then gently explains what's actually happening, what is happening in the child's brain that makes them do that, or what they're learning as a result of that. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about the importance of that. You have a lot of focus on serve and return interactions between parents and children. And could you maybe just explain to some of the parents out there what that term means, serve and return, and what it's doing, why it's so important and why you feature it so prominently?
Absolutely. Well, serve and return, if you think, the term actually comes from tennis, right? And so if you think about the back and forth, in tennis, hitting the ball back and forth across the court, it's very similar to what infants and parents do in their early verbal and nonverbal interactions. And so if you think about the sort of the back and forth between a parent and a newborn infant, that they are face to face, that they are sort of, locked in attention wise on one another. And it's an opportunity for parents and for children to sort of engage back and forth, that parents can, mimic the language, the early verbalizations that infants are making. It's a chance to sort of mimic back and forth facial expressions, which I think, people don't necessarily always fully appreciate the importance of, right? That we think of language learning, for example, as being something that is primarily like a hearing skill, right? That we listen to language and we learn to emulate it without regard to the fact that, that much of young children's early language development is very highly dependent on the, children's watching our faces, right? They're watching the way that their parents' mouths move as they make these wonderful sounds. And, many of these videos, as you probably know, sort of spotlight the ways that babies are mimicking even the movements of their parents' faces. And so serve and return can, we've featured it in terms of, language, in terms of facial expressions, parents and infants taking turns back and forth, sticking out their tongues, but it's this engaged back and forth between infants and their parents that is such an important part of early brain development.
Hi, my name is Bobby, and I love you. Hi, my name is Bobby, and I love you.
Why do you think these posts are so relatable and so easy for parents to understand? Why are they such a good tool?
That's a good question. I think we all benefit from learning from examples, right? And to have certain things explained. There, I think a lot of what parents need is, it's not rocket science in terms of its complexity, but it may not always be entirely intuitive, right? I mean, the idea that you might start reading to a brand new newborn infant, or beyond that you might start reading while your baby is still in utero, may strike some parents as sort of counterintuitive, right? That this, the child, this is a child that isn't yet using language themselves. So, helping to explain why these things are important and how they benefit young children, I think is something that people have just really responded to.
I love you. I love you.
Now, before we started recording, I told Dan that I wasn't going to fangirl him, but I might go back on my word, because the one thing I wanted to capture is, I think the reason, and if parents haven't signed in and had a look at these accounts, the reason that so many hundreds of thousands of people are doing it is because whilst early childhood experts have known the research for decades, we haven't always necessarily been good at presenting that to parents in a way that doesn't add to the guilt, doesn't make you feel like you're not doing enough.
Oh, see, and sorry,
yes.
As someone who is away from the research like you are, Kate, what I love about your videos is that I feel like I'm already doing that. This is happening at home, and you actually, I think you engage more when you feel that you're going okay.
Well, it's such a gentle tone. And I just wanted to ask whether that was intentional, because, there is this joy. And as you said, parents can look in and see, one, I'm doing that, or two, look at the way this baby's responding to this.
Ow, ooh, ow, ooh.
I could do that with my child.
Doesn't need to be so contrived.
Yeah. But also, Dan, we know that, and in your latest book, which we're going to get to shortly, you talk about how learning begins in utero. And I just wanted to ask about the balance between, like, I know when I was pregnant with my youngest, I was working a high-pressure job, I was juggling a toddler, I was dealing with life, and I really had a view, this baby can wait till it's born. I've got nothing else to give now.
Yeah.
How do you get the tone right between showing the importance of what you can do and what benefits that can bring a child, and recognising the stresses that parents every day are under? Because you do it beautifully, and I'd love your advice on how you get that right.
Well, I think, one, I would say I thank you for recognizing. It is a deliberate effort, in part because I recognize these are videos that families have put out there made available. One thing that I can assure you is that, as you go through my social media, what you will never find is a post that says, look at, the boy, this mom is really screwing up,
Yeah.
right? Here's somebody I really wish would do some things differently. And, there, not that those videos don't exist. In fact, there are some really mortifying things out there on social media, some trends and things where I don't know if you've seen, I've written sort of vaguely about them, about, there was a trend a couple of months or maybe a year ago where people were cracking eggs
Oh, that was horrible.
open
Yeah.
on the foreheads of children, just mortifying. But so it's definitely a deliberate effort to find things that are going well and to uplift, the genius of these parents who are doing things right in everyday moments, and the genius of these young children in ways that, might sometimes just be written off as, cute baby behaviors, but really, in many cases show such complex thinking. And so, the joy that, I mentioned, it's still a tentative title, but the next book that I'm working on is tentatively titled Wonderment, our first 3 years. And so, I really do hope deliberately to capture the joy of this time period and the wonder that is involved, not only for the children, but really for the parents. And I think that, one of the things that I'm most hopeful that I can help to sort of contribute to this conversation is that, many times we look at young children's behaviors sort of from our perspective as adults, rather than thinking about them from the child's perspective. And so, even the term, I don't know how widely you use it in Australia, but we talk about the terrible twos, right?
Yes. And the threes.
The toddlers are, and the truth is that when you really understand developmentally what is happening for children, and something as simple, I posted something not long ago. It was a video, wonderful interaction between a mother and a baby, and the baby was repeatedly dropping things from a high chair onto the floor. And mom was sitting there patiently with this child, and each time picked the object up, handed it back, and the baby was dropping the things, but the baby was not only dropping things, but was tracking, visually, was sort of leaning over and watching. This is a child that was learning about gravity. And learning about the physical world that they live in for the first time, and experimenting with that. And so, here's a behavior that would be very easily dismissed as frustrating or misbehavior, even, right? That, if you're gonna keep dropping things, then I'm gonna remove that object and try to take that away. And I think, the more that parents can really be attuned to what's happening for their children at each of these very special stages of development, the more we can look at their behaviors with very different eyes, right? That this isn't something. Now, does that mean that anything goes any time of the day, and that, that we can, reasonably or even afford to have children, throw their food on the floor all day, every day? No, of course not. But, when you understand what's happening developmentally, it forces you to look at this with a new sense of wonderment yourself.
Your baby's mind is growing even before they arrive. The more you talk and sing and play, the more their mind will thrive.
Every time you interact with your child, you're helping grow their mind. For more information, visit wordsgrowminds.org.au.
These are the most critical, formative years of all of our lives, and yet we don't remember them, right? We, neurologically, we're not well equipped, most of our narrative memory doesn't really kick in until about age 3, generally. And so, that there is this incredibly special period of time that is part of all of our origin story, individually and as a species, that we just don't remember, right? We can remember our adolescence and, our early adulthood. And, as our kids get older, we can draw upon our own experiences, and what it meant to be in high school, for example. But, we don't retain a lot of memories from that special time. And so, I'm finding that this is content that has appeal, yes, certainly to new parents, but also just sort of to anyone who is interested in, what it means to be human.
But I think that also means that there might be people out there who don't understand the importance of those first. The child's not going to remember anyway. We can plonk them down here. Why would I bother investing all of this time? So I think that the importance of those years is really important, and a beautiful way that you get that out. So you've got a current book. We're talking about your next book. I love your ambition. I love your ambition, but let's give your current book a plug before we talk about the next one. The daycare myth is out there. Obviously, the US early childhood education system is very different to the Australian one. But can you maybe talk about what the key messages that you hope to get out through this book were, and how that might relate to systems across the world as well?
Yeah, well, you set it up beautifully here in this segue, because it's very much about that disconnect between what we know from the science of early development and how we act on that in our public policy. And you're right, the book uses very American policy examples, but if there is a lesson that I have learned, both in our conversations around, the system in Australia, I'm getting ready to go and spend several weeks in Ireland and the UK, where they're having very similar conversations. There's a lot of universality around this idea. And so the book is called The Daycare Myth, and the idea about what the daycare myth is this idea that we have for the better part of 100 years here in the United States kind of fooled ourselves into believing that there are two different things, right? That young children need care, and that slightly older children get involved in learning and education, and that we have fooled ourselves into thinking that there is this thing called daycare that exists in its own special little bubble that is not educational, right? That it's sort of separate and distinct from our education system, and that mostly it is sort of a safe, warm place where children can be left for 8 hours, while their parents go off to work. And, the book really, uses the most current brain science to illustrate, as you mentioned, for example, that what we know now is that learning actually begins, not even at birth, but that important forms of learning, language learning, for example, begin in utero, particularly during the latter part of the third trimester, as hearing really becomes activated. And so, to even say that children are learning from the day they're born is a little bit of a misnomer, because it's starting even earlier than that. And so what I'm hoping with this book is to illustrate, again, just how critically important, that all environments for young children are learning environments, that the question is really whether they're any good. And, to really pose some hard questions about, if in fact we know, that all of this important brain development and learning is happening during the earliest years of life, then that ought to have a bearing on how we treat those years. And instead, here in the United States currently, it is very much the norm in childcare or daycare settings, that teachers who are working in those settings are making less than we pay dog walkers.
That's
right?
wild.
Where they're making less, and in some cases here now, dollars an hour less than we pay people to hand French fries through a window at a fast food restaurant. And really raising up the importance of this period of time and the importance of the adults who work with these young children, which is very much out of balance at this point.
With that in mind, what do we then as parents, I'm a parent who my son's in childcare, what am I looking for? Because I guess the typical things are, is it a clean place? Are there lots of educators there? What are we looking for in good childcare?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because I think and the book sort of hits directly on this. But if I had a bit of advice for parents, of course we want a clean place, right? But that's take that as just sort of a prerequisite, right? I think I really strongly encourage, as you are looking at an early childhood program for your child to enroll in, one of the most important things you can do as a parent is go and spend time, tour that center and spend some time there. And by touring that center, I don't mean walking down the hallway and peeking in a classroom for 10 seconds and moving on. Ask to spend some time actually in the classroom that your child might be enrolled
with your
in.
child.
And
do you suggest bringing your child in as well?
Depending on the age of your child, sure. But I think if they'll allow that, but if you can't do that, go as a parent and spend 15 minutes, spend 30 minutes in that classroom. And while you're there, what you want to be looking at is the adults in the classroom.
Okay.
Right. And so while, and what you would hope to see, if you go into a toddler classroom to visit, and what you see is that there are two adults in the classroom and they are standing off in a corner having a conversation between themselves for the bulk of the time that you were there, that is a place that maybe you need to run from, right? That is a big red flag. If, on the other hand, you go in that classroom and what you see is adults who are down on the floor at eye level with the children, who are interacting directly with them, who are extending their play, who are extending their language, asking questions, sort of gently probing and guiding and involved in the play. Boy, that is very much the opposite. That's a big green light that this is a place where the developmental needs of kids are being met. I think the underlying message of the book for parents is choosing an early childhood setting for your child, whether you're electing to stay home with your child, which some people are in a position to be able to do, and maybe others not so much, or choosing a program outside of your home. This is a choice that is terrifically consequential. It's arguably the most important decision that you may make about your child's early life. And what you are selecting here is not a babysitter, right? I mean, you are literally selecting the adults who will help to co-construct your child's brain in ways that will ideally help to scaffold them to success for many decades to come. So this is a big responsibility. It's not a babysitting job that you're tasking out. It is helping essentially to co-parent.
We're also very lucky in Australia that we have national quality ratings. Every centre is assessed, so parents can get information on the program and where that sits and, how high they want to demand that their service has been achieving.
The one thing that we do want to ask every guest that we have on this podcast, based on everything what do you wish parents in this day and age knew? Something simple, something that perhaps could put a lot of us at ease.
I think, my overall message here is that the early years really matter. Mm-hmm. That this is a time where, not only is the fundamental architecture of the brain is wired in ways that will, help to support your child a lifetime of success, but that happens earlier than we might think, right? The prenatal piece of it, but also that it's not so hard, right? A lot of this is intuitive. It's something that takes a dedicated focus and just a commitment to that face-to-face interaction, that loving interaction with your child. And again, this is, you're not choosing a babysitter, you're choosing who will help to co-construct your child's, and that whether you're choosing someone outside of the home or not, you play a hugely important role in helping to construct your child's brain during this early period.
We will certainly be sharing all of your social media contacts with our listeners so that they can tune in and enjoy that joy and that perfect tone and that wonderful work that you do. And we thank you for that work, and we thank you for your time in joining us today. We wish you all the best with the book.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kate, that was such a good chat. What I really liked about the overarching message of what Dan was saying is, for me, loosen up and be curious. It's so easy to get bogged down in, the admin, and I've got to get out of the house and I've got to do this and eat all the good foods. But in actual fact, just going, why is this happening? I really took a lot of peace in that, because I don't need to be the architect of this big activity. You always feel like you have to do activities as parents, and really the activity is just life.
Yeah, I really love his work. I really like talking to him. What I took out of it was, one, positivity. Like, he's really focused on what parents can do, the benefits, as opposed to judging and criticising, but also the importance of the early years. I think he does a great job in letting people know just how much they can get from that, and the joy and the importance of the early years and the joy. But also, I think that the point about thinking of things from the child's perspective, I think that can really help as a parent when you're thinking about what they're doing to you, what stresses they're putting on you, to flip it to what is the child going through, what are they learning, what are they exploring through this behaviour, is a really helpful way to look at things.
Especially as a type A personality, which I am, you might even be thinking like, they're not doing this yet. And you're thinking of the negative. And it really is a glass half full approach with Dan, which is lovely, because knowing what you know about all the impacts in the early years, it's actually a little frightening as a parent. I sit there and I go, God, what have I stuffed up today? But it's more approaching it from, well, what are they thinking?
Absolutely. And I can't encourage enough any of our listeners who want to look further and have a look at Dan's social media offerings. They are so beautiful, so positive, and we're going to share how you can find them.
They'll be in all our show notes. And, of course, that does bring us to the end of today's episode. So all the references that you need that you might have heard from today's show, we'll have in our notes today. Of course, thanks once again to Dan Worry. We'll see you again next time for more Words Grow Minds.
Thanks for listening to the Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. We love hearing from you, so please subscribe, review and comment on the podcast. And for plenty of ideas to support your child's development, go to wordsgrowminds.org.au and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Your words will grow their mind.